All right, college basketball teams have only about 3 or 4 more games before the tournaments begin. And where do the locals stand? More on that. We bring in college basketball insider for CBS Sports. Jon Rothstein joins us once again. Jon, this is the heavy time for you right now, right?
I feel like an accountant on April 14th.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, imagine you're getting a ton of calls. And we want to focus on what our local teams are doing. St. John's, Seton Hall. St. John's has 19 wins, Seton Hall at 16, but we keep hearing they're both bubble teams. Explain the difference between those two. Why is 3 games that much of a difference?
Whoever's telling you about St. John's is not being accurate, because St. John's is comfortably in the field right now. And the bottom line is this. You can hear everything you want about all the different metrics that exist. Here's the bottom line when it comes to evaluating teams for the NCAA tournament. Who did you beat? Where did you beat them? And when you look at St. John's, they've got 2 wins over Marquette. They also have that big win over Villanova. And they also have a neutral site win over VCU in November. VCU right now the best team in the Atlantic 10. So when you compare St. John's against the rest of the field, St. John's comfortably in right now as a projected 8 or 9 seed. Now, what about Seton Hall? What about the quest to get back to the NCAA tournament for the 4th straight year under Kevin Willard? Seton Hall very much in the bubble picture right now, and they also have a tough finish because they still have to play at home, both Villanova and Marquette. But these are 2 big things that Seton Hall fans need to breathe easy about. Seton Hall has 2 chips to play with when it comes to Selection Sunday. They've beaten Kentucky on a neutral court. Kentucky projected to be one of the top 4 overall seeds and the number 1 seed. They also have a road win at Maryland. Those are 2 things that won't go away on Selection Sunday. Okay,
so which one of those resumes would you rather have? That big win over what is considered a number 1 seed, or what St. John's has done with 2 wins over Marquette?
St. John's is in better shape than Seton Hall. And look, I've said this repeatedly since last summer ad nauseum. St. John's has the most talented team in the Big East when you look at their roster player for player. But as we've seen, Steve, over the past couple weeks, they have been college basketball's definition of Jekyll and Hyde. So you just wonder if this team can ever get its consistency together. What type of ceiling would it have? Because when I look player for player right now, nobody's better than the team in Queens.
Okay, and you would think that you might call Seton Hall a consistent team because they've gone 3 straight years. Last year, they actually won a game in the tournament. But that's the thing. They're going to the dance, but they're not winning a ton of games in the dance. Does past history kind of help them get into the tournament this year?
Well, what happened in past years has no bearing on the current NCAA tournament. And one thing that's really interesting, and I know about this because a couple of years ago I went to Indianapolis and sat in with the selection committee on a mock selection of the bracket.
What surprised you when you were there?
Well, what's ironic is this. There's blind resumes when you evaluate team by team.
Okay.
So there's different metrics involved. You have different listings of quad 1 wins and strength of schedule and things like that. But the committee evaluates teams without looking at their school name. They really rate everything based on the metrics and who has the best overall resume. So Seton Hall, being a team that's played in 3 straight NCAA tournaments, won't make a difference on whether or not it will play in the field in 2019. What will make a difference? Those wins over Kentucky and Maryland.
We have seen that intangibles kind of at least play a role when Selection Sunday comes about, how the team is ramping up in the final weeks before the NCAA tournament. If there's an injured player, how that could impact that. So how do they measure that when they bring that in?
Well, the one thing you always need to remember, and this obviously relates to a team like Duke that has had Zion Williamson out for the past couple of games, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee always seeds its teams based on the team that's going to play in the NCAA tournament. And a perfect example is 19 years ago when Cincinnati clearly had the best team in college basketball with Kenyon Martin as its best player. He had a gruesome injury in the Conference USA tournament, and Cincinnati, which was the best team in college basketball all year, was then relegated to the 2 line because of the injury to Kenyon Martin. So that's stuff that they're always evaluating and looking at.
Okay, well, speaking of injuries, clearly Zion Williamson made headlines this week with his injury. And yeah, we've talked about this. It's only a 2-week injury. He'll be ready to go for the NCAA tournament. But I want to push him even further into the NBA. He's 6'7", he's 285. He's not a prototypical player at any one of those positions, but he has that agility and athleticism and his speed. Does the fact that he doesn't fit into a position hurt him or help him?
Well, what's the new in term right now at all levels of basketball? Positionless basketball, and there is nobody more positionless than Zion Williamson. But the big area where people, I think, are underrating this kid is what he does defensively. Over 2 steals a game, around 2 blocks a game, and his efficiency, too, is off the charts. How long in all your years covering sports? I know it's a few decades right now.
You had to age me.
Can you remember a guy in basketball making approximately 7 out of every 10 shots that he takes?
Well, you have to be around the rim to do that.
No question.
In the NBA, somebody like Dale Davis back in the 90s might have been one of those guys.
And Dale Davis didn't have the grace and the speed of Zion Williamson.
Definitely not. They're definitely playing within 3 feet of the basket. I want to talk about how things could be changing in sports, because in college football, 8 players sat out their bowl games this past year to preserve themselves for the NFL draft. Is there a fear that could start to become more common in hoops?
You know, I talked about this earlier on CBS, and I think it's one thing that we all need to understand. The decision of these players to sit out and protect their best interests for the future is only the decision by themselves and their family. That's what matters. But at the same time, while people are trying to protect what they can earn through, obviously, their sports and their vocation and their endorsement potential, you can't put a price on what it would mean from a legacy perspective for a kid like Zion Williamson, not just to play for Mike Krzyzewski, but to have a chance to go through his tutelage during the ACC tournament, during the NCAA tournament, and be somebody that could bring him, Mike Krzyzewski, his 6th national title. You can't put a price on that.
And you wear your college colors on your chest even through your NBA career. If you step into an NBA locker room, all those guys are waving the flags of their colleges every single week.
Look, I've been covering college basketball right now for about 15 years, and every former player I have ever worked with always told me, look, the NBA is a business, but the best times I've had in my career in basketball were in college. And you see that more and more about college kids and college athletes wanting and needing a place to go back to. That is why this is such a big thing to keep in mind when you think about people bypassing the opportunity to play games that they're never going to be able to get back on stages that they might never be able to replicate, just obviously for the greater good of the dollar.
Well, that stage could be changing because the NBA is considering changing their entry age from 19 to 18. What impact do you think that's going to have on the college game?
You know, I talked to Jay Wright about this a couple of times last year, and I think, you know, the one thing that college coaches would expect would be you'd have maybe less of a talent pool in college basketball. There would be less guys like Zion Williamson, less guys like Ben Simmons, but you would have maybe a throwback to what we saw in the 80s and the 90s with guys staying 3 or 4 more years. You would have more teams that would advance deep in the NCAA tournament in the mold of a Villanova or Notre Dame versus a team like a Duke or Kentucky like we've seen the past couple of years.
Well, it'd be interesting, and maybe it could be good for college basketball if they actually do go to the
kids deserve the right to go out of high school if they're okay and eligible for the NBA draft, and there's a chance they can get drafted. But I think the one thing, you know, that I worry about, the one thing that coaches worry about, delusions of grandeur run rampant when we look at adolescent athletes who have a following and have a chance to play basketball for money. I mean, how many kids have we seen have productive college careers but get bad advice, go into the NBA way too early? I mean, there's a young man, Brandon McCoy, a 7-footer who had a really good freshman season, would have been one of the best players in the Mountain West Conference this year. He was 7 feet, which we know is a different type of commodity now with positionless basketball than it was in the 90s. He doesn't get drafted. And now all of a sudden, he's trying to get a spot in the G League. He's trying to get a spot overseas.
China, right.
And he can never get back the opportunity to grow and blossom as a college player at UNLV.
You can get all of his insights on CBS at Sports Illustrated. And, of course, you've got a podcast, College Hoops Today, College Basketball Insider. Jon Rothstein, thank you so much, man.
Look forward to talking to you a lot more in the next month. This is only February.
I can't wait. Your phone's already buzzing. We'll be back after this.